The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
All right, welcome to our noon book review. Today we're going to hear about the book Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora and Neale Hurston. Our reviewer is Brenda Twiggs, the director of Hudson Valley's library. And now we're going to join her in her review.
Won't have to be a talking head. We can be participants. Now, when I say who has read the book, I guess I should say who has experienced the book in its many formats. And of course, basic to this is the book by Zora and Neale Hurston. Wonderful book. There was also the video. Did any of you see the DVD? Okay. Only or in addition to?
I saw the night that they were doing the big speech downtown.
Okay. Okay.
Page Hall.
Okay, so this is available to watch. And I think with any movie version of a book, it doesn't touch the book. It was a disappointment. You know, I know Oprah Winfrey does wonderful things. This was not one of them. And I don't send this tape to her, but it was okay. And what the DVD did for me was to give me an overall of the book, you know, start to finish. And it gave me images of people. Holly Berry was wonderful. She's always wonderful. And the character Janie is a very attractive woman with long hair. And of course, that was depicted in the movie. I didn't like Tea Cake very much in the movie, but still, the characters were there. There was a real clear image to me of Logan Hillix. I mean, they made him really old. Really old. I mean, you don't have to, you can be old and not be really old. They made him really old, which meant you could understand why she left him. And of course, Jody was arrogant, and he was depicted well in the movie too. So it gave me a visual image to go with what I was reading. So I appreciated it for that. It was someone's impression of who these people could be. So I enjoyed that. But to me, the very best, in addition to Zora Neale Hurston herself, was Ruby Dee reading the book, the audio book. Have any of you heard this? Okay, this is wonderful. My granddaughter, who's 5, listened to this. I would play it in the morning on the way to work, and she would listen. Ruby Dee does a wonderful job. And we're going to listen to a chapter, because I think many of you may have had trouble reading the dialect. And that's an integral part of this. So we'll listen to a chapter. And if you want, maybe another chapter. But just so we're on the same page, we'll listen to a chapter with Ruby Dee. Ruby Dee makes every sentence drama. Really. And I think it's wonderful. So of the formats, those are the 3 formats that I have experienced with this book, and they each have their merits. Of course, the book is wonderful. Okay, so the book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, is by Zora Neale Hurston. She wrote it, interestingly enough, in 7 weeks. I'm not an author. I'm sure if you've read a lot, different authors take different periods of time to write a book. And some people think that the longer it takes, the better it is. But in 7 weeks, she created a masterpiece. Now, it was probably a culmination of a lot of her experiences, because you know that she was, she's an anthropologist, and she spent a fair amount of time going through the South, collecting folklore and idioms and observing culture. So she used all of that in her book, plus other experiences that she had. So when you know a lot, perhaps it's easy to write something this good. She was also a masterful storyteller, and you can see that in the book, throughout the book. She's a wonderful storyteller. And then she mixed this culture, these idioms, into her script. And it made for a wonderful story. But I think basic to this was her love for her culture. She wanted to preserve the African American culture through the idioms. And she did. And this book was written during a period of time where there were a lot of black intellectuals via the Harlem Renaissance. And the trend was to move away from the dialect, to move forward into some other kind of presentation. And that's fine, no problem with that, no problem at all. But I think she wanted to preserve the beauty of the dialect. And if you're trying to read it, I think everybody can understand it. It's difficult to read. But she wanted to preserve the beauty of the dialect and to integrate that into the life of the people. And she did. You know, one of the things that you see in here, I love porches. I love porches. And porches play a significant role in here. And this is where you see a lot of the culture on the porches, because they would come together and they would talk. And they would tell stories. They would tease each other. They would play the dozens, friendly insults. But it was part of the culture, part of their living. A lot of the little idioms were expressions. You had to be part of the group to understand the expressions. But you don't want to lose that. You want to keep that. And I think that was what she did. And she put it all together with her skill as a storyteller. These things came together in the dialogues between the characters. So it was a wonderful presentation. Okay. Now, so that was what she wanted to do, I think, as far as the culture was concerned. She wanted it to be a positive reaction to folk culture. And she's telling the story of Janie through Janie's attempt to find spiritual fulfillment. Janie had a tough time. But throughout the course of the book, she found her spiritual fulfillment. Now, to jump to the end, she shot TK. Why did she do that? He had been bitten by a rabid dog. He was gone. For all practical purposes, he was gone. He was a rabid dog. Had he bitten her, she would have died the same kind of death that he was going to die. But part of her spiritual fulfillment was that she was strong enough to protect herself. She had come that far. Because she had been her first husband's almost slave. He was getting ready to go buy a mule, a second mule, for her to use. He was going to have her walking behind that mule. And she didn't want to do that. Then the second husband, Jody, saw her beauty. And his value system suggested that he needed an ornament. And she became the ornament. But in so doing, she was not herself. She had no identity of her own. She was his ornament. He wouldn't allow her to speak. When they had this big celebration in town, and he was speaking, he was talking, and someone said, well, let Mrs. Mayor Stark speak. He said, oh no, I didn't marry her for that. She's not to speak. So she was suppressed. He wanted her to do what he wanted her to do. She had pretty hair, we mentioned that before. He wanted her to put a rag on it, tie it up. Now in the African American culture, that's okay. You see a lot of women with scarves on their head. But he wanted her to cover it up for a different kind of reason. He was jealous of her. The porch, the people, they had a porch on their store. And people would gather there, and they would talk and tell picture stories and have a wonderful time. He didn't want her to participate in that because she was different. She was the mayor's wife. She had to suppress herself. So she was not realizing her potential. Okay? She was suppressed. Okay? So her journey towards self-actualization. Then she met Tea Cake. Tea Cake was 12 years younger than she. And Tea Cake treated her differently. Now, people would say that he treated her equally. He did not. In fact, I liked Tea Cake before I really started looking at him. In fact, at one point in our book discussion group, we said everybody needs a tea cake. I don't think so. I don't think so. He was an interesting character, but he was abusive. Now, she did not depend on him, but he was part of her progression to self-actualization. You know, he treated her almost like an equal, but all three of her husbands required that she be obedient to them, that she would do what they wanted her to do. But they were abused. They beat her. Even Tea Cake did. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But they were abusive to her. But Tea Cake treated her more as an equal. He allowed her to express herself. He taught her things. At first, he taught her how to play checkers. Then he taught her how to shoot, which was his own undoing because he killed her. but he treated her like a person. He allowed her to converse with him. He allowed her to grow. And that growth was her fulfillment. That was her fulfillment. Now, there was a thing about this book that's interesting. It's called a feminist book. And it talks about, or she deals with language. Now, throughout Janie's life, there were periods of time where she didn't express herself. She couldn't. Her husbands wouldn't allow her to. But with Jody, she began to. She began to stand up to him, you know, and say things that she didn't like, even to the extent once that she confronted him verbally in their store. He confronted her. He said something very degrading to her, and then she retaliated, and she wasn't very nice, but she was standing up for herself, and he hit her. He hit her, and that caused a big problem in their relationship. But she was willing. She had kind of moved to a point of speaking out for herself. And you would say, okay, good, super, great. But then with Tea Cake, there were things that Tea Cake did that she remained silent about. So it was like, why did she remain silent? You know, this woman who's moving towards self-actualization and who has begun to speak out in support of herself, why did she remain silent with Tea Cake? Because Tea Cake, as soon as they got married, after a few days, he disappeared, took her money. She didn't know where he was. Then he came back and told her he had given a party with her money and invited all these folks. Ugly women couldn't come in. But there were all these people, all this food. And she was like, well, why didn't you come and get me? Well, I thought about it. But I didn't, because I didn't want to bring you down to that level. And guess what? She accepted that. Her silence. She accepted it. Then there was another instance where there was a fear that he had that this woman, Mrs. Turner, was going to try to get her brother to date or to take Janie from him. And in order to show his authority, he beat her. She hadn't done a thing. He just wanted to show his power. She was silent on that. She didn't exert herself. At the trial, where she was defending herself for shooting him, her presentation was limited. So she remained silent. So why did she remain silent? Perhaps she remained silent because for Zora Neale Hurston, there was power sometimes in silence when you have achieved your goal. And it seemed as if she had achieved her goal. She wanted love. That was part of her fulfillment. She found love with TK. She had a new kind of independence. She was experiencing things in life that she had never experienced before. So maybe she had gotten where she wanted to be. Maybe that's why she was silent. But it was interesting. Why would she be silent? Why would this book be called a feminist book, and yet the heroine lets these big events go by without speaking up? But she did. We can talk about that if you wish, if you have thoughts about that. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about Janie and Janie's attempt at her own self-actualization. Now, she goes away and she comes back, and she comes back and she allows her friend Phoebe to tell her story. So the book is really her recounting her life to her friend Phoebe. Okay, and Phoebe is to tell all these curious people what happens if she chooses to do so. Okay, now we've talked a little bit. Let's talk about Janie a little bit, and what were some of the things that motivated Janie, and Zora Neale Hurston's use of things. One of the things that happens early in the book is that she's under a blossoming pear tree, the revelation that initiates her quest. Under the pear tree, she witnesses a perfect union of harmony within nature. She knows that she wants to achieve this type of love, a reciprocity that produces oneness with the world, but she is unsure how to proceed. But she's looking for this oneness with the world based on this experience with nature and this pear tree. And of course, the other thing with nature is the hurricane that she has to deal with at the end of the book. Okay, and again, that is another experience with nature where nature is overwhelming. Now, one is very calm. The pear tree scene is very calm. She sees the bees and the pollen, and this is very calming, and she thinks this is what love and marriage ought to be like. So that was what she was focused on. That was Zora Neale Hurston's way of dealing with nature. And she deals with nature again with the hurricane in a very traumatic kind of way. And this too is very revealing. In fact, in terms of the title, Their Eyes Were Watching God, it was after the hurricane that three characters are on a rooftop, and they are, I guess, kind of reflecting on things. And it says that, and their eyes were watching God. And it wasn't the God as a divine element. It was more the God as a force of nature, and how they together dealt with that force of nature. How they dealt with the force of nature. They survived that part, but they dealt with it together. Okay, tea cake and Janie dealt with it together. A group of people dealt with it, but the notion of the God was the force of nature. So Zora Neale Hurston used nature in several ways in this book to show how Janie dealt with forces that were beyond herself. Okay, that makes sense? Okay, okay. This title is kind of hard to deal with. You know, have any of you any other discussions about the title that you've heard through other discussions about the book?
I agree with you about nature. I saw the God as nature.
Okay.
Same as you did.
Okay. Any other thoughts about her choice for the title?
remember seeing the Hurricane Katrina, and African American people saw the force of nature
Okay.
in there.
Okay, all right, Tom.
I thought that it was a great title because there was a lot of survival aspects there. And she was dealing with people who were in a poverty situation for the most part. Well, that's throughout the book. And for that reason, they had to look upward in order to get some assurance of health and success. And lots of times they didn't, well, for instance, when Grandma talked to Jamie, lots of times she prayed and called on the Father by saying, Lord, have mercy, and things like that. Meaning to me that she was at her wit's end.
Okay.
And she was relying on the experiences of the past and relying on our Heavenly Father. And I think Zora Hurston was manifesting that in that prose.
Okay. All right, thank you. Yes.
I thought it just meant that they were looking for hope. They were waiting for hope from somewhere.
Okay. All right, any other thoughts? Yes.
I think I mentioned to you that I read somewhere that title indicated that the white man always looked to a force that would tell him what to do, and that he was always concerned with material things, his crops, and therefore he was looking to a God who would lead him to safety. Whereas the Indians that fled to their own culture groups, they did the right thing because they fled to people that they loved and would give them hope. Now, I can't recall what the source was, but I do remember I didn't invent it. And I suggested it to you when we spoke briefly, that I thought that it was a very interesting interpretation of that particular period, now, of that title. Now, was Zora a very religious person? I know her father was a parson, but was she a person that embraced religion with all her being?
I don't know. I don't think religion is a high point of this book. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I do want to deal with back to the notion of the hurricane. There were warnings that the hurricane was coming. Some Native American people came through and indicated that they were going to higher ground because of some message in nature that they understood. They were going to higher ground. Tea Cake felt he could overcome the hurricane. He was going to defeat this problem. So hence, he and Janie opted to stay. It was again a force of nature that he thought he knew the monk well enough and conditions in the monk that he could withstand this. And that's not unusual in situations. A lot of folks were told, as far as Katrina is concerned, go. But they didn't. They stayed. So and even back to their eyes were watching God, there were several people on the roof. There were 3. And it was there. They were doing it. They were trying to overcome this force of nature together. And they had been, as far as surviving at that point was concerned, they were successful. They didn't continue to be because it was after that event that the mad dog came along and Tea Cake succumbed to that. Okay, but any other thoughts about the title? Okay, difficult title, interesting title. Although it says their eyes were watching God, but yet the story is primarily about Janie. And there were lots of inconsistencies like that throughout the book. Okay. Now, some other little cultural norms. Janie's grandmother wanted her to have a better life. You know, she wanted her to experience some security, because the grandmother apparently was old and she had responsibility for her granddaughter, and she wanted to make sure that she was okay. So then she pawned her off on old Logan Killicks. And his main claim to fame was he had 60 acres. More than 40 acres and one mule. He was going to get 2. But that was his claim to fame. But that was not her notion of what she wanted. With Jody, her second husband, he had big ideas. He wanted to have a voice. You know, in the African American community, that voice sometimes is silent. But Jody knew, or Jody wanted, to play a major role in some community. So he went to the all-black community of Eatonville that was in need of leadership, and he provided that leadership. Now, he set up a store, a post office, or there was a few other things that were in that building. But it also provided a bit of classism, because he wanted his wife to be elevated from the other folks. And she didn't want that. She wanted to be a part of the group. She wanted to participate in the talking and the storytelling and the sharing on the porch. She didn't like that. Now with TK, he was a happy-go-lucky kind of fellow. And it seemed as if wherever they went, people came together. So that provided that social outlet for her. But now, even in terms of a little classism there, at one point he told her to stay in the house and cook and take care of the house and all that. But then he came up with, he wanted her to work with him at the milk. And she didn't say anything about that either. She said, okay. But that was a little bit of classism there, because he wanted to elevate her and put her on a pedestal. There was another lady in the book, Mrs. Turner, who just thought it was awful that Janie would be married to a guy like TK, that her brother was far better for her. And that was a class thing as well. So classism exists within the African American community. And Zora Neale Hurston talks about this. Now, why does she talk about it? Well, I think she probably was a part of both groups. She was a student. She attended, I think, Howard for a while. Then she went to Bernard. She was part of the Harlem Renaissance crew. So she could interact at that level and interact quite well. But she could also interact at another level and felt very comfortable. And I think what she wanted to say in this book is, that's all right. That's all right. You don't have to choose. It's okay. Okay? And she wanted to preserve the African American culture. Okay? Any questions? Yes.
And of course that goes back to slavery. If I were a black person living and writing in 1937 as this book was written, slavery would never leave my mind. And so I had a feeling when I read that or heard it, that this discussion of color came up and the way she treated it. When Mrs. Tanner, I think, wanted her son and felt he was superior, that this involved some kind of a problem of the past. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But what was Janie's reaction to that? You remember Janie's reaction to that? It was not important to her. It was not important to her. It was important to this lady. And this lady owned a restaurant. And word got out that she thought that the people in the muck were beneath her. that they were socially and by class beneath her. So what did they do? They got together and ran her out of town. Now, they ran her out of town by having a fight in her restaurant. But the problem was, yeah, that happens. And she liked Janie because apparently she had a lot of white features. And the fact that Janie had the hair that she had, and I guess in her color, suggested that she had white heritage. So they had a common bond, or at least Mrs. Turner thought so. And she thought that, and Ms. Turner thought that, one way to, straighten up this race is to have, lighter folks, Janie didn't agree with that. That was not her perception. And that was not the perception of the majority of people. Does that exist, or did that exist in the African American community? Yes. Why did it exist? It goes back to slavery time, that whole thing. It goes, all of that. And people had different opinions about it. For some people, it made no difference. For other people, it made a lot of difference. Yes.
I thought that Sister Hurston made a very interesting point about that in the beginning of the book. She talked about when she discovered that she was colored. She didn't know that she was any different from anyone else when she was a little kid, until finally there was that photo taken, and she had to be identified as the only black person in that particular picture grouping. And so it seems to me that she was well aware of that, and she confronted it. But she, I think Sister Hurston had a very expansive view of our life. She was very perceptive of our civilization, and she just brought that out in that book.
Mm-hmm. This is a book about black pride. Yeah. Now, she brings out a lot of negatives, things that you might want to put in the corner somewhere, but they exist nonetheless, and she dealt with them. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments about it? Florence?
She mentioned about the Indian part of the culture. Mm-hmm. And it was not only just black-white, it was black-white and Indian. It's a white Indian mix, mm-hmm. It was a black mm-hmm. Indian mix. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that became a real part of her research and the anthropological part of her seeking out the sources of all the folklore. Mm-hmm. Because so mm-hmm. much of it was a blend and mm-hmm. going to the islands, mm-hmm. Haiti and mm-hmm. Jamaica, mm-hmm. but also bringing in the Indians had that premonition about the storm coming, mm-hmm. but they mm-hmm. were very much a part of the community.
Right, and even at the Monk, yes. There were lots of groups on the Monk, and that made it a very nice community because there were lots of groups. Did they have their idiosyncrasies? For sure, but they lived together, and that was part of their thing. That people solve certain problems together. They dealt with nature and the world together. Okay. Okay, yes.
Well, one of the aspects of talking about in the nature of God, especially in New Orleans, where the African American community lived, mm-hmm. that levee was old, and the government knew about it a long time ago. And when it broke, it went into the African American community, and that's why they reacted. We don't want to go. We've been living here for 150 years. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. Look what FEMA did. The money dried up, but it went to other communities. It should have went to those people so they can live there.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments up to this point?
I just want to say that Zora Neale Hurston was my sister's idol.
Oh, really?
Just idolized her. Mm-hmm. And that's how I came to know more about it. Because being younger,
Well, can you share any anecdotes about that relationship?
Well, I know my sister was very independent. Had difficulties. Well, one of the things she refused to go to Howard University because she heard that there was this problem of class down in Howard. Loved New York and just wanted to read and follow, she and a couple of her friends follow Zora Neale Hurston's following her footsteps because I liked her.
Now, she had, did any of you hear her niece? Her niece was in, okay, can you want to share some of that you learned from her niece?
Oh, well, I even bought the book.
Okay.
Yes, the niece was a live wire. She explained why she got started doing this book. Because her father, Everett, was Zora's youngest brother. So she never met Zora, but she did inherit all these boxes in the attic because apparently her father couldn't have been poor because he had a bunch of houses in Brooklyn that he rented. And in one of the attics that they lived in were all these boxes and boxes of things like letters that Zora wrote, and she wanted to make it so we would have our own little pop-up game to play with actual Zora's writing, like a facsimile, and that was good. You get and there's even a little CD so you can hear Zora speak. So that was what the niece talked about. She didn't meet the woman, but she inherited the boxes from the estate. So the book very carefully says by Lucy Ann Hurston and the estate of Zora Neale Hurston.
Okay. Anybody else who yes?
I thought it was interesting, the story that she told about the rift that developed between Langston Hughes and herself. Because they were going to produce, was it Their Eyes Were Watching God? They were going to produce
A play? Was it a
It
play?
was a play. I'm not sure which one it was. And then she found out that the person who was typing up everything was going to get like 1/3 of everything. So they, this great friendship that they had. But at the end, I think they reunited.
Okay.
Because I think at her funeral, Langston Hughes spoke or something like that.
Okay. All right. Any other comments about other things you've witnessed about this? I'm going to play. Yes.
I have two comments.
Okay.
One is Lucy Hurston did say that if you want to know Zora, that Janie is Zora.
Okay. I've heard that. Yes.
That
Yeah.
she said that is.
Yeah.
And the other thing I thought was interesting about the book, I think Janie came full circle. Because what happened was in the beginning of the book, the reason she was married off to Logan Killix was because she found this sort of ne'er-do-well walking down the street and she kissed him over the fence. And at the end, who does she find true love with? But a ne'er-do-well. I mean, that it was
A carefree person.
okay.
A carefree transient.
Yeah, a transient. But that I think it's sort of her grandmother stopped that true love. The whole pear tree representing the true love and so forth. And she sees the boy, and at the end, who does she end up with? But her true love. So I found the book more of a circle that she started off when she was 13 or 14, however
16.
old she was when Grandma married her off.
And even the courage to shoot it, in terms of coming full circle. She had the courage to shoot him. Now, one could say, the judge would say, it was self-defense, and it was. It was doing the community a favor. It was that. But she had the courage to do it. So yes, she had come full circle. And that was part of her self-actualization. And then another point to that, she was able to go back home At one point, she had said that she didn't really want to marry someone in the community because of comparisons that people would make. But she was willing to go back into that community and make those comparisons herself. She was content. She had lived her life according to her definition. And when she came back content. Yes.
Well, in reading the book, I feel very blessed because I grew up with that kind of dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the gems in the book that really brought back memories for me when I was a kid was Yes, Daddy.
Mm-hmm. Yesterday, yeah, I know yesterday well.
Yeah. But, you know, there was so much wisdom and so much love in you know, the language.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really appreciate the book bringing all that home to me.
Mm-hmm. And I think that was her intent, to preserve it. And that's why I want you to hear Ruby D. Now, I have another question.
Another point that her niece made was that the book is alive and well, and going strong.
Mm-hmm. In Florida, yes. Yes.
Well, one of the things you talked about a lot was the fact that she learned her voice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was left with really wondering what happens to Janie, because in some sense, I felt like she hadn't gotten there yet because she could only talk to her friend about what her life was like. And, you know, what will happen? Will she be one of these wise women who can help others along the way, sitting on the porch, or will she go back into silence?
Into what?
Silence.
It's an interesting speculation, but I think when you consider that she did come full circle, at least it'll be her choice. She's strong enough that it could be her choice. Okay? Because she talked about how content she could be in her house with all the memories. And in the movie, I think the movie ends with her in the lake. And I think there, they used the phrase, and their eyes were watching God in the video. So there was a sense of contentment. Okay, what I want you to do now, we're going to listen to chapter 12. And I want you to hear this if you've not heard. I want you to hear it so that you can get a sense of the beauty of the dialect. It's difficult to read sometimes, but when you hear it, there's beauty in the expression. And this expression was used by a people to communicate. There's beauty in it. And what she wanted to do was to preserve that beauty. Ruby D does a wonderful job in reading this book. So we'll just do chapter 12. If you have the book, you can follow along. It's word for word. So it's chapter 12.
It was after the picnic that the town began to notice things and got mad. Tea Cake and Mrs. Mayor Starks, all the men that she could get, and fooling with somebody like Tea Cake. Another thing, Joe Starks hadn't been dead but 9 months, and here she goes sashaying off to a picnic in pink evening. Done quit attending church like she used to. Going off to Sanford in a car with Tea Cake and her all dressed in blue. It was a shame. Then took the high-heel slippers and a $10 hat, looking like some young girl, always in blue because Tea Cake told her to wear. Poor Joe Starks, that he turns over in his grave every day. Tea Cake and Janie gone hunting. Tea Cake and Janie gone fishing. Tea Cake and Janie gone to Orlando to the movies. Tea Cake and Janie gone to a dance. Tea Cake making flower beds in Janie's yard and seeding the garden for her, chopping down that tree she never did like by the dining room window. All those signs of possession. Tea Cake in a borrowed car teaching Janie to drive. Tea Cake and Janie playing checkers, playing coon can, playing Florida flip on the store porch all afternoon as if nobody else was there. Day after day and week after week. Phoebe, Sam Watson said one night as he got into bed. I believe your buddy is all tied up with that TK Shuloff. Didn't believe it at first. Oh, she don't mean nothing by it. I think she's sort of stuck on that undertaker up at Sanford. If somebody, 'cause she looks mighty good these days, new dresses and her hair combed a different way, and then every day you got to have something to comb her over. When you see a woman doing so much raking in her head, she's combing it some man or another. Of course, she can do as she please, but that's a good chance she got up at Sanford. The man's wife died and he got a lovely place to take her to, already furnished. Better than a house, Joe Laffer. You better sense her into things then, 'cause TK can't do nothing but help her spend what she got. I reckon that's what he's after. Throwing away what Deuce taught, worked hard to get together. That's the way it looks. Still in all, she's her own woman. She ought to know by now what she wants to do. The men's was talking about it in the Grove today and giving her and TK both the devil. They figure he's spending on her now in order to make her spend on him later. Oh, they got it all figured out. Maybe it ain't as bad as they say, but they talk it and make it sound real bad on her part. That's jealousy and malice. Some of them very men wants to do what they claim they scared TK is doing. The pastor claimed TK don't allow her to come to church only once in a while because he want that change to buy gas with. Just dragging the woman away from church. But anyhow, she's your bosom friend, so you better go see about it. Drop a little hint here and there, and if TK is trying to rob her, she can see it and know. I likes the woman, and I sure would hate to see her come up like Miss Tyler. Oh my God, no! I better step over there tomorrow and have some chat with Janie. She just ain't thinking what she's doing, that's all. The next morning, Phoebe picked her way over to Janie's house like a hen to a neighbor's garden, stopped and talked a little with everyone she met, turned aside momentarily to pause at a porch or two, going straight by walking crooked. So her firm intention looked like an accident, and she didn't have to give her opinion to folks along the way. Janie acted glad to see her, and after a while, Phoebe broached her with, Janie, everybody's talking about how that tea cake is dragging you around to places you ain't used to. Baseball games and hunting and fishing. He don't know you's used to a more high-time crowd than that. You always did class off. Jody classed me off. I didn't. No, Phoebe. TK ain't dragging me off nowhere I don't want to go. I always did want to get around a whole heap, but Jody wouldn't allow me to. When I wasn't in the store, he wanted me to just sit with folded hands and sit there. And I'd sit there with the walls creeping up on me and squeezing all the life out of me. Phoebe, these educated women got a heap of things to sit down and consider. Somebody done told them what to sit down for. Nobody ain't told for me, so sitting still worries me. I want to utilize myself all over. But Janie, TK, why she ain't no jailbird. He ain't got a dime to cry. Ain't you scared he's just after your money? Him being younger than you? He ain't never asked the first penny from me yet. And if he loved property, he ain't no different from all the rest of us. All these old men that sitting around me is after the same thing. They sleep over the women in town. How come they don't break their neck after them? 'Cause they ain't got nothing, that's why. Folks see you out in colors, and they think you ain't paying the right amount of respect to your dead husband. I ain't grieving, so why do I have to mourn? TK loved me in blue, so I wears it. Jody ain't never in his life picked out no color for me. The world picked out black and white for mourning. Joe didn't, so I wasn't wearing it for him. I was wearing it for the rest of y'all. But anyhow, watch yourself, Janie, And don't be took advantage of. And you know how these young men is with older women. Most of the time, it's after what they can get. Then it's gone like a turkey through the comb. Tea Cake don't talk that way. He's aiming to make himself permanent with me. We done made up our mind to marry. Janie, use your own woman. And I hope you know what you're doing. I sure hope you ain't like
Okay.
the older you get, the more sense you got.
Enough? Okay. Okay. So you get a sense of the language, the use of the language to convey ideas, a little bit of classism, a little bit of woman-to-woman talk about this young man who is up to no good, all kinds of things. Okay, any thoughts or questions about
One thing I thought about the book was a lot about storytelling, telling stories. Everyone a lot of times, a lot of the characters in there, they go on for a couple of paragraphs. I mean, a lot of their life seems to be a story, or they talk about their lives in these story terms. I found that very interesting.
But that's part of the culture.
You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
I just, I realize that it's part of the culture, the black culture, the storytelling. I don't know, maybe back in those days, people were not real educated. So they learned to communicate in terms of telling stories that sometimes were true and sometimes were not.
Yeah.
But that was their way of communicating.
Well, she spent her life collecting stories.
Sure, yes. And one in terms of picking a chapter to share, I started to do chapter 6, I believe. That's about the mules.
Okay.
Because that is a story. And what they did, they thought up additions. You know, you hear part of the story this week, and then someone would come up with another part to the story next week. It's not a lot of difference in that and talking about American Idol. Really, it's what you do. And you're right, there weren't a lot of other venues. So people used what they had, and they enjoyed it. The point, I think, here is that it was part of the culture. It was part of the tradition, and it was enjoyed. They enjoyed it. They would sit for hours on the porch, exchanging stories and lies and all and the dozens. You know, the dozens are friendly insults. And to a person who's unaware of that, they would think, well, these folks getting ready to fight. But that was not what it was about. It was fun. It was fun. And it was part of the culture. And that was part of what she wanted to preserve. And she did it masterfully by integrating it into the story. Okay? Yes?
I thought it was very, very interesting talking about that mule and how it was so much a part of the culture, but how Jody Stark eventually bought the mule, apparently to keep it from being killed, well, not killed, but ridiculed to death in the community. But I thought that a part of that culture had, well, the guys have sort of tried to outdo each other in teasing the mule. And apparently the mule was so old that he wasn't going to last long anyway. But all of a sudden, it was unexpected to me, Jody decided to buy that mule. And I thought he was buying it for Janie. But apparently not. He was buying it for a humanitarian reason. And I thought that was quite interesting.
I thought so too. Yes?
Did anyone notice when she was married to Jody that he really married her because he felt she was a prize? And when they got into the argument in the store, he was, you know, always talking, but she took his voice. And when she took his voice, that's when he went on a downhill as far as his health.
He didn't have power over her anymore. It was a power thing. He lost the control over her. And he lost it publicly. Because she embarrassed him. 'Cause as long as she would acquiesce, then he was a businessman. He wasn't going to mess with his customers. He wasn't going to insult them. But she was fair game until she stood up to him. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
I'm still disturbed by the end.
Okay.
That Janie had to kill.
TK.
And also that TK, that in some way he was punished by the title that he was watching God. I can't resolve. I have a feeling she was saying something that I don't understand.
But now, didn't she have to kill him?
Yes, she had to for her own protection. But I just wondered what was in the mind of the author when that scene at the end.
Oh.
It was full of violence.
Yes.
And so unpredictable.
But now, one thing I did read about that might shed a little bit of light on that. Tea-Cake was a supporting character in her life. And when he had done what he was supposed to do, as far as Zora Neale Hurston was concerned, he could be eliminated. He had done his part. He had helped her come full circle. So in terms of a storyteller, she could eliminate him. And she did it very dramatically. I think she had lived through a hurricane. So I think she had some notion of that. So she used that. But again, all of the men in her life were supporting characters. And in the hands of a potter, if you will, a writer, you use them as long as you need to. And then when you're done with them, you know, she grieved. I'm sure she mourned Tea-Cake more than she did Jody. But she had met her self-fulfillment. She had done those things that she wanted. She wanted to find love. She found it. She loved Tea-Cake. There was no question about that. They loved each other. They were good to each other and for each other. But he did have a violent end. One thing that surprised me was they put her on trial. Didn't last long, but it was a trial nonetheless. That the black community did not support. That was interesting. You know, but then they changed their mind and they kind of rallied around her at the very end. Now, one thing I didn't understand, and perhaps you can help me with this, she went back to town, seemingly defeated. When you start reading the book and you get the description of her coming back into town, she came back in overalls. You know, she kind of went to the house, didn't speak to anybody, kind of let them say, okay, here she is, what she's been doing, all these questions. But through the course of the book, you find out that she did come full circle. But I wonder why Zora Neale Hurston didn't have her come in more victorious.
Guilt. I don't think it was guilt. I think she was sad. I pictured her as mourning. She was still mourning now. Mourning the loss of her love and mourning. Yeah, it was huge for her. So I thought when she came back, she was just incredibly sad. That's how I saw her.
Okay. Yes. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, Tom.
Well, two things. One, I thought her overalls were victorious because nobody would have, you know, that isn't what they expected, and that's what she wanted. But the second thing is, my first reaction was this was very violent, and then I tried to imagine how it would end with Tea-Cake if it had kept on going. And I think that would have been bad, you know. She learned what she needed to from him, and it could have just gone downhill from there.
But yet, you know, the interesting thing about her finding her voice was her acquiescence. It was like, yeah, Tea-Cake, we'll go here. Yeah, Tea-Cake, we'll do that. She acquiesced, totally. But yet she had found her voice. Interesting. Tom?
I thought that she might have been concerned about the fact that she ran off from Logan. In other words, there were no divorce or anything like that. She ran off with another guy, with a younger guy. And so when she came back to the town, she came back to a community which, would recall all of that and sit on the front porch and discuss it for years. And
They probably
she
did.
understood that she had to come back into that environment, and but she was prepared for it because she had had those other experiences, and I think she had the author gave her a good sense of the freedom that women really are entitled to when she understood the culture that she was in.
Okay. Yes.
One point that I remember in the book, didn't Teacup bite her?
I think he did, yes. Yes, he
So
did.
They left that unfinished.
Yes. In fact, before she picked his head up, she had to take his teeth out of her arm. He bit her.
Right.
He bit her. Maybe he didn't break the skin. Remember, he was shot. maybe that lessened the bite somewhat, But yeah, he did bite her. Yes. Yeah. So that was the DVD doesn't do much for it. The book describes it quite well, and of course, Ruby D does a good job in terms of reading that part. Yes.
One comment when you say you wonder why she asked yes. I think it almost told that she really found out what love is. I mean, love is you want what's best for the beloved. And TK needed that. I think he deeply needed it. And I think it showed she learned what love was all about.
I agree.
I think that could be one point there.
I agree. And she was fulfilled. It wasn't a struggle anymore.
He did.
You're right. And he did. Yes.
In that chapter 12, he was talking about that TK had chosen blue for her to wear. They wore their overalls together in the muck. So perhaps this was a symbolic kind of mourning for TK.
Okay. Good point. And because she didn't want to stay in the muck because of him, but yet, yeah, she could have. That could have been symbolic of her. I agree. Thank you. Okay. Any other thoughts about the book?
Yeah, well, thank you, Brenda, for coming, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.